Today I will be showing you how I edit this photo from this to this. It will be one image I will be editing today in Lightroom. If you're interested in seeing me how I edit a sequence of photos or a different style of photo, feel free to leave a comment down below. I'd be more than happy to show you how I do that as well. So here we are in Lightroom. I am in the develop module, and when I do my edit I like to start from the bottom up, make sure certain things are set. And again, all these settings are subjective. These are all based on my preferences. Your preferences are probably different, but just to show you my preferences when I do an edit, and maybe you get some idea, maybe that helps you in your edit. Here we are, and I like to start from the bottom up. So here with the highlight priority, I like to throw a little bit of a vignette, and I put it at -10 usually. It varies, but I like to be around -10, no more than that. Throw a little bit of a feather on there, and right now I'm just using my mouse. I'm left clicking. That's mostly what we're going to be hearing is a left click, and I use my keyboard a little bit to input numbers, but it's really basic. I am not using any special tools other than my mouse and keyboard for this. And then when I come up to lens corrections, I want to make sure that I remove chromatic aberrations, enable profile corrections to make sure that it has the correct camera and lens. Then I work my way up, and for noise reduction I turn all this down to 0. These are default settings, so if it's not something you need or want, make sure you turn it down. I tend not to use this to sharpen my images. Most times my images come out pretty well. I use this a little bit sometimes, but I use an app that helps me pull sharpness. I can show you that in a different video, but for this video I'm just going to be turning this down. And of course these are just sliders, so if you're interested in using this, it's just like a back and forth. You see what you like. It does, as you sharpen, it will create noise, and you can add luminance, and that tends to remove the noise, but it also can soften the image. So I avoid this as much as possible because most of my images do come out relatively sharp, so I really don't use this too much. And when I come to my color, for certain colors I turn it down a little bit. For purple I'll turn it down to around -10. For my magenta I'll bring this down to -15, and the reason I do that is because around in the highlights there tends to be a little bit more magenta and purple casting for whatever reason, so I turn this down just to remove that. And even though I've never really noticed the aquas or greens affecting my image, I turn it down a little bit just to make sure I remove any of that. And again, these are just preferences. These kind of change here and there, but this is usually where I'm at for my color. I don't play with the tone curve, and a majority of my edit tends to be here. This is a majority of my edit. One of the first things I like to do when I first get here is make sure my image is straight. So most times I hit auto, and it usually works. And something you can do, I hit auto, and I'll left click here and hold. It shows me my grid, and it gives me some idea of what's straight and what's not. And when I compare all the lines in the buildings to the grid lines, it looks straight. It looks pretty good. Lightroom usually does a pretty good job. Every now and again it gets kind of wonky, really depending on what you're shooting. It'll throw it off a little bit. So I can go ahead and close it here by left clicking here, or just hit done. And then next is I like to go to my temperature. And usually for evening shots I'm around 3700 to 3200, really depending on the image and what time I took it. And for tint I'm usually around 40. And usually, whether it's day or night shots, I'm usually around 40. It's just a personal preference of mine. Bring up my exposure a bit. That looks a bit bright, but I'll leave it there for now. My contrast, I'm usually around 25. Highlights, I drop them all the way down. Yeah, and for me, I tend to like the images better when it's dropped. For shadows, again, this is just personal preference. I'm usually around 60 to 40. I'm gonna put it at 60. For whites, when I check whites, I left click here on the toggle and I hold on Alt, and it shows me essentially what is blown out. What is white is blown out. There is no information. So you can see in these lights over here, there's not going to be any information there, so I don't mind losing that. So again, I'm going to left click here on the toggle and hold on Alt, and I'm not looking to recover anything there because I'm not. It's such a bright light, so I'm not going to get too much here, but again, I want to make sure I don't blow out any really important detail. For instance, like here in this building, see, if you go too much you're losing all that. That's all detail that's being lost. But yeah, that's what I do for The whites, that's fine for now. I can always come back and use a brush tool. For blacks, I do the same thing. Left click on the toggle and then hold on Alt. And that's essentially when I'm losing information, which is not a big deal. I don't mind that. That looks pretty good so far. Clarity, I do bump it around 20 to 30, really depending on the image. Dehaze, for this, throw a little bit on. Just dehaze it around 10 to 15 is good. It does tend to add a little bit of a blue cast to it, so I don't add too much. Vibrance, it's around 20, 25, again, depending on the image. That looks good right there. That is a majority. So now I like to throw on a graduated filter. And for this, when I do a graduated filter and I want to add a graduated filter to the top part of my image, I left click, hold down left click, and I hold down shift and I drag down, and that allows me to keep my graduated filter straight. And I like to bring it to around the base of the buildings, the horizon, right around there. Looks pretty good. And I'm usually around a -1/3 of a stop. And if you like, you can always bring it down a little bit more, but usually about 1/3 of a stop is good for me. And I like to come over to my adjustment brush tool, click on that, and I want to, again, I'm just scrolling here on my mouse to change the size. You can add a feather. I do add a little bit of a feather to it. The flow is at 100. And yeah, I like to just go over kind of the bright highlights in an image. There it goes. I don't want these to be blown out. Let me see what I'm affecting here. I don't want these to be too bright. So just left clicking, just brushing around, showing you what it's affecting right here. And if you don't want this, you just unclick this. But if you still want to see what it looks like, just hold over the toggle and you can see exactly what you're affecting here. And you could always move this toggle if you wanted to, but I don't want to, so I'm hit Control and Z, and that's going to put it back where I had it. That looks pretty good, and I want to add another one here. It's a bit brighter in this part of the buildings, so click on New, add a new one. Bright parking lot, and it's the U-Haul storage facility. So yeah, parking lots tend to be pretty bright, and it doesn't tend to look really good in an image. So I just want to bring down the highlights a bit. Again, this is just all personal preference. You don't have to do any of this, but for me, I do. And bring it down, the exposure just a little bit more. A little dodge and burn. You don't want it to be too obvious. And that looks pretty good right there. Did that. So now the next thing I like to do is check for random streaks in the sky. It's a long exposure, 15 seconds. So I like to just go around the base of the buildings where helicopters and planes fly and get rid of them. So I come to my spot removal tool, and I usually have it set to heal. And the size varies depending, but for the most part, try to keep it as small as possible. Add a little bit of a feather to it, and opacity 100. And there's several ways you can do this. If you have a straight line like this, you can try to freehand it like so, which isn't always the best, but it works in this case. And then I'll hold down the space bar to keep moving along, moving across the image to see where else I'll have streaks of light. See right here, it's like spotted. So I'll do this in patches. Well, let me try it once with just going all the way across. It's probably not going to come out too well. Nope, I don't like it. I mean, it doesn't look bad, but I don't like that. So what I'll do is I'll do this in patches. Remove that part. Boom, pulls from there. That's pretty nice. Do this part. Pulls from there. That's pretty nice. See how this one does here. And there. Move it up. Let me just remove this right there as well. Holding down the space bar to move it along. Left click here. Slide it up. Make this a little bit smaller so I can remove this one. I mean, that's not bad, but I'm just going to slide this down a little bit so it removes that, and that looks a lot better. Alright, so now holding down the space bar. Oh, here it is. I think that's the same plane. So we're going to do this in patches as well. Nope, don't want you pulling from there. Let me slide this up and see. That looks a bit better. Let me just remove this one too as well. It's not helping anything. That looks better. So now let me get rid of this little thin line. Nothing major, but nope, don't want you pulling from there. Remove this one. That looks good. The last little bit here, left clicking, dragging, very simple. It's a little tedious but worth it. You don't want these random streaks. It takes away from the image. It's a bit distracting. So I like to make sure these are gone out of the image. I know there's at least, wait, there was one over here I think I'm missing. I think I'm missing one. Let me close this. I can click on here or hit done, but I'm just going to click on there. Bring up the exposure, make sure I'm not missing any other ones. Oop, hit the space bar. So left click. Ah, there it is. I knew I was missing one. So it goes from here. It's a long one. It's a long exposure. Let me back this up a little bit. I'm really close. So right here in zoom, go to 101. You can see it goes from here all the way across to there. Make sure I'm not missing anything. So for longer ones, you can do this freehand. So now I'm going to go to spot removal, still heal. Open it up a little bit. So I'm going to left click here. And then I'm going to come all the way over here and hold down shift and left click again. And it'll give me a straight line. And it usually does a pretty good job of removing all that. Can't even see. It's gone. Magic. So I think I have a few more. So here's a couple more. Again, I'm going to do this freehand. These are little short ones. Not that hard. Boom, gone. Holding on spacebar. This might be the last one I'm hoping. Gone. It's amazing. Lightroom does such a great job. Let me make sure, because sometimes that little thing will make it throw it off. Yeah, it's not noticeable. You can tell. So here's a spot here. So I'm going to open this up a little bit. Open it up. That's enough. More than enough. Get right on it. Pulls down. Yep, looks good. Yep, looks good. I think I got everything. I'm looking for any more spots. I think that's a spot there. Done. See how that does it? Yep. Yeah, it looks. Yeah, it's gone. All right, so I'm gonna bring down my exposure back to where I had it before. I like it. That looks good. And usually it's not this high. It's just for this particular image. Actually, in the original, it's a little lighter. For some reason, the copy is the exposure is a little bit different. The saturation is a little bit different. So that yeah, I'm turning a bit things up a little higher than I normally do, just for this particular image, for the copy of it. So I think everything is straight. I like to double check that. And I like to look to see how it looks balanced, how balanced it is in the 1x1 for Instagram. That's where I have most of my following. So I like to make sure for Instagram it looks good. So that's why I compose it. So that looks good. And I want to just make sure I'm not missing anything else. I don't think so. I don't think I need the... No, I don't need the sharpener or anything like that, or add noise. That's something I can do in another video. I really don't need it in this one because my ISO was at 50. That's why I like to use a tripod at night, so I can keep my ISO as low as possible. So I had at 50 and, you know, shoot at f8, so I'm getting almost everything in focus. And that's why you tend to have those long streaks of light. But I think for the most part, I am done here. I'm done. I think so. I covered it. Yep, got everything. So now I'm just going to go ahead and export this. Hit export. It's going to my hard drive. It's going to a particular folder I have. It has certain file name. It's going to have my name, the file name, date, all the metadata. So it just gives me information. So when I post, I like to post the metadata as well to help other people figure out what kind of settings can work in certain situations. And I make sure it's a JPEG and sRGB. If you ever had an image look off in Instagram or another place where you posted where the tints and the hues are really weird, check to see if whether or not you're in Adobe. It happened to me. For some reason it switches every now and again when I use LR time-lapse. When I do my time-lapses, it'll switch this to Adobe. So just check this, have it at 100, and I hit export. And I've already exported this before. I've had the original, so I am not going to overwrite that one, so I'll just use unique. It just adds a number to it. And that is my edit. I hope that didn't take too long. I hope that was helpful. If you got something out of this content, I would greatly appreciate a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button if you're interested in seeing more videos like this. Leave a comment or question down below. I'd be more than happy to answer or reply to those. And remember, keep shooting. Thank you so much for tuning in. Take care.